Imagine waking up knowing that you have in your hands the key to open doors that have been closed for years, that you can touch the heart of God in such a direct way that He will not be able to resist pouring blessings upon your family. That is exactly what I'm going to teach you today. Dear brothers and sisters, August 14th is not just another day on the calendar. It's the feast of Saint Maximilian Maria Kolbe, the martyr of charity, the man who stepped forward in the darkness of Auschwitz and said, "Take me instead." This is the priest who lived his entire existence under the mantle of the Virgin Mary, who founded an army of souls dedicated to her Immaculate Heart, and who proved that love is stronger than death itself. Padre Pio revealed something profound about days like these. He taught that when the Church celebrates a saint who loved unto death, heaven opens its floodgates of grace. These are moments when our prayers rise faster, when locked doors swing open more readily, when the impossible becomes possible for those who act with living faith. Today, I'm going to share with you the 3 specific things you must do on this sacred day. These aren't mere suggestions or pious thoughts. These are concrete actions that Saint Maximilian himself practiced. Actions that Padre Pio confirmed carry extraordinary power when performed on feast days of the great saints. But before we dive deeper into these life-changing practices, I want you to become part of something bigger than yourself. If you sense that your deepest struggle needs supernatural intervention, type these words in the comments. Saint Maximilian, transform my impossible situation. Don't just type it mechanically. Let those words carry the weight of whatever burden is crushing your spirit right now. You see, there's something supernatural about invoking the saints on their feast days. It's like catching lightning in a bottle, like finding an open frequency when all other channels are busy. St. Maximilian spent his earthly life interceding for others, sacrificing for others, loving others unto death. Do you think that passion for souls diminished when he entered glory? Padre Pio would often tell his spiritual children that certain days are marked by heaven itself. Days when graces flow like rivers after a storm, when miracles happen more frequently, when the veil between earth and heaven grows gossamer thin. The feast of Saint Maximilian Maria Kolbe is one of those days. But here's what most people don't understand. These graces don't fall on passive hearts like rain on barren ground. They descend upon those who actively participate in the mystery of radical love. They come to those who, like Saint Maximilian, dare to step forward when others step back, who choose sacrifice over safety, who trust in God's power even when circumstances scream otherwise. This saint wasn't born with extraordinary courage coursing through his veins. He was a man like any other, with fears that whispered doubt, anxieties that stole sleep, and human limitations that seemed insurmountable. But he made a choice early in his life that rewrote his destiny. When the Virgin Mary appeared to him as a young boy, offering him 2 crowns, one white for purity, one red for martyrdom, he didn't hesitate or negotiate. He accepted both with the boldness of innocence. That decision shaped every heartbeat that followed. It led him to establish the militia of the Immaculata, an army of souls dedicated to converting the world through Mary. It drove him to use every available means to spread the gospel, from printing presses that ran day and night to radio stations that crossed oceans. It sustained him through persecution, imprisonment, and finally, that ultimate moment in Auschwitz when love conquered the machinery of death. The 3 things I'm about to reveal to you aren't just historical curiosities about a saint from the past. They're a blueprint for spiritual victory in your present struggles. They're weapons tested in the furnace of humanity's worst evil and proven victorious against impossible odds. So prepare your heart for what's coming. Because by the time this day ends, if you follow this path with sincerity, you won't be the same person who started watching this message. Let me take you back to a moment that would define not just one life, but millions of lives for generations to come. Picture a young boy, barely 10 years old, kneeling in prayer when suddenly the room fills with an otherworldly light that seems to pulse with love itself. The Virgin Mary herself appears before little Raymond Kolbe, her hands holding 2 crowns that shimmer with promise and purpose. "My child," she says with a voice like music made tangible, "which crown do you choose?" Most children would have pointed to the white crown of purity without hesitation. It represents a beautiful life, a safe life, a life protected from the sharp edges of human cruelty. But Raymond looked at both crowns, the white one of purity and the red one of martyrdom, and with a wisdom that defied his years, he whispered words that would echo through eternity. "I choose both." In that moment, heaven itself held its breath. Because Mary had found a soul willing to love without limits, to give without counting the cost, to follow Christ even unto death. That little boy would grow up to become St. Maximilian Maria Kolbe, and his choice that day would ripple through the corridors of time. What Mary showed Raymond in that vision wasn't just a personal calling. It was a preview of the cosmic battle raging in our world, a battle where pure love would be the ultimate weapon against the forces that seek to destroy human dignity. She was recruiting a soldier, not for an earthly army, but for the militia of the Immaculata, an army of souls consecrated to her immaculate heart. Maximilian understood something that many of us struggle to grasp. Total consecration to Mary isn't about losing yourself in religious devotion. It's about discovering who you truly are when fear no longer controls your decisions. He often said, "When we give ourselves completely to the Immaculata, we become her property, and she transforms us into perfect instruments of God's love." This wasn't just beautiful theology for Maximilian. It was lived reality that shaped every decision, every relationship, every moment of crisis. He threw himself into spreading this message with an energy that bordered on the miraculous. He founded magazines that reached millions, built printing presses that never stopped running, established communities that thrived, and even ventured to Japan to plant seeds of Marian devotion in foreign soil. His motto became a battle cry that rallied souls across continents for the Immaculata. But the real test of his consecration came when darkness descended upon Europe like a plague. When the Nazis invaded Poland, they targeted priests and religious with particular venom, understanding instinctively that these men posed a threat to their ideology of hatred. Maximilian and his fellow Franciscans were arrested and eventually transported to Auschwitz, where humanity's capacity for cruelty reached depths that still haunt our collective memory. Yet even in that manufactured hell on earth, Maximilian's light refused to be extinguished. Prisoners later testified that he moved through the camp like an angel walking through flames, sharing his meager food rations when he was already starving, offering spiritual comfort when he himself was suffering, hearing confessions when speaking meant risking death, and reminding broken men that they were loved by God when everything around them screamed the opposite. One survivor, Bruno Bogoviec, would later say with tears in his eyes, "Father Kolbe was always serene, and he spread serenity around him like perfume. He was never downcast, never morose, never angry. It was as if suffering couldn't touch the core of who he was." The climax came during one of the camp's most brutal punishments. When a prisoner escaped, the Nazi guard selected 10 men to die slowly of starvation as a deterrent to others. As their numbers were called like a grotesque lottery, one man, Francis Gajowniczek, cried out in anguish that pierced the heart of everyone who heard it. "My wife, my children, I'll never see them again." That's when something extraordinary happened. Maximilian stepped forward, not with drama or fanfare, but with the quiet certainty of a man who had been preparing for this moment his entire life. Calmly, without a trace of fear, he approached the commanding officer. "I want to take his place," he said simply, as if he were asking to switch seats on a train. The officer, Perhaps shocked by such an unexpected request in a place where self-preservation ruled everything, agreed. Maximilian walked toward his death with the same peaceful determination that had marked his entire life, but also with something more, a joy that seemed impossible under the circumstances. Here's what makes this story even more remarkable. During those 10 days in the starvation bunker, Maximilian transformed that place of death into a chapel of praise. Survivors could hear him leading the other condemned men in prayers and hymns to the Virgin Mary. When the guards finally injected him with carbolic acid to hasten his death, witnesses reported that his face bore an expression of peace that seemed almost supernatural, as if he were seeing something beautiful that no one else could perceive. Padre Pio, who understood the mysteries of suffering better than most, would later teach that St. Maximilian's death wasn't just the end of a heroic life. It was the ultimate expression of what Marian consecration really means. He died as he lived, Padre Pio observed, as a perfect son of Mary, showing the world what it looks like when someone loves as Christ loved. This is why today carries such concentrated spiritual power. When we honor St. Maximilian on his feast day, we're not just remembering a historical figure or reciting pretty stories. We're connecting with a living source of grace that flows directly from the Immaculate Heart of Mary, channeled through a soul who discovered the secret of loving without limits. Speaking of this powerful connection to Mary's heart, there's something I want to share that could deepen your own spiritual journey. Just as St. Maximilian used every available tool to spread Marian devotion, we've created a resource that captures the essence of what made both him and Padre Pio such powerful intercessors. The rosary was their shared weapon of choice. In Maximilian's hands, it became an instrument of conversion. In Padre Pio's hands, it unlocked miracles. This simple string of beads was their direct line to the Mother of God, their source of strength in impossible circumstances. We've prepared The Power of the Rosary with Padre Pio, Miracles, Protection and Graces, a guide that reveals how to transform your own rosary from routine recitation into a conduit of supernatural power. You'll discover the hidden depths of each mystery, understand why certain prayers carry more weight than others, and learn the specific methods both saints used to make their rosaries weapons of spiritual warfare. This isn't just another religious book, it's a manual for the kind of prayer life that changes everything. The link is pinned in the comments, and I genuinely believe it could be the missing piece in your spiritual arsenal. Now let's return to those 3 actions that can transform this feast day into a launchpad for miracles. The first action you must take today, and what St. Maximilian considered the foundation of all spiritual victory, is to consecrate yourself, or renew your consecration, to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. But I'm not talking about merely reciting words from a prayer book while your mind wanders elsewhere. I'm talking about a surrender so complete that it changes the very molecular structure of your spiritual DNA. St. Maximilian taught that when we give ourselves entirely to Mary, we become her property in the most liberating sense possible, and she transforms us into perfect instruments in God's hands. Think about that for a moment. Not improved instruments, not better instruments, but perfect instruments. This isn't spiritual hyperbole designed to make you feel good. It's the reality of what happens when we stop hoarding pieces of ourselves from the Mother of God. Here's how to do this properly today, in a way that creates lasting change rather than temporary religious feelings. Find the quietest place in your home where you can kneel before an image of the Virgin Mary. If you don't have one, even a simple picture will do. What matters is the sincerity of your heart, not the monetary value of the image. Take your rosary in your hands and really feel its weight. This isn't just a piece of jewelry or a religious ornament collecting dust on your nightstand. It's a weapon that has conquered demons, converted hardened sinners, and opened the gates of heaven for countless souls. Now, speak to Mary as St. Maximilian did, not with flowery language designed to impress invisible listeners, but with the raw honesty of a child talking to the one person who understands them completely. Say something like this, but make it your own. Mary, Mother of God, I give you my past with all its failures, regrets, and missed opportunities. I give you my present with all its struggles, fears, and uncertainties. I give you my future with all its dreams, anxieties, and unknowns. Make me yours completely, so that I might belong entirely to Jesus through you. If you've already made this consecration before, don't think it's unnecessary to renew it like reheating yesterday's coffee. St. Maximilian renewed his consecration daily, understanding that our human nature constantly tries to reclaim pieces of what we've given to God. Each renewal deepens the surrender, tightens the sacred bond, and opens wider the channels through which grace flows. But here's what many people completely miss about Marian consecration. It's not passive spiritual retirement. When you become Mary's property, you don't become inactive. You become incredibly active, but your activity is guided by her wisdom rather than your own limited understanding. St. Maximilian didn't become less energetic after his consecration. He became more focused, more effective, more willing to take calculated risks for the kingdom of God. The second action flows naturally from the first, like water following the path of least resistance. Padre Pio taught that on feast days of great saints, we should offer a holy mass or receive communion with a specific intention, not just any intention, but an impossible one. Yes, impossible by human standards, impossible by natural logic, impossible by everything your practical mind tells you. Why impossible requests? Because St. Maximilian's entire life was a series of supposedly impossible achievements. Building a massive printing operation with no startup capital, impossible. Converting thousands in Japan without speaking the language fluently, impossible. Maintaining hope and joy in Auschwitz while watching humanity's worst impulses unleashed, impossible. Stepping forward to die for a complete stranger, impossible. Yet he did all of these things because he understood something that eludes most of us. When we unite our prayers with the Mass, when we receive Jesus in the Eucharist while interceding through a great saint, we're not limited by natural possibilities. We're operating in the realm where God specializes, making something out of nothing, bringing life from death, creating hope where none existed before. Today, when you attend Mass or receive communion, present that situation that keeps you staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., that family member who seems forever lost to faith and good sense, that financial burden that appears to grow heavier each month despite your best efforts, that health crisis that doctors describe with increasingly serious faces, that relationship that seems beyond repair, where too many words have been said and too much damage has been done. Don't hold back because you think your request is too big for God or too small to matter. Don't edit your prayers to make them more reasonable or socially acceptable. I remember reading about a woman who, on St. Maximilian's feast day 3 years ago, brought her son's heroin addiction to Mass with trembling hands and a breaking heart. She had tried everything that human love and determination could attempt. Rehabilitation centers that cost more than her house, therapy sessions that ended in shouting matches, interventions that became battlegrounds, prayers that seemed to bounce off the ceiling, threats that only pushed him further away, pleading that fell on ears deafened by addiction's lies. Nothing worked. Her son was dying by degrees, and she was dying with him. But on that August 14th, she received communion and whispered through tears, "St. Maximilian, you know what it means to sacrifice everything for love. Please help me save my boy. I'll give you anything, my comfort, my reputation, my own life if necessary." Within a month, her son voluntarily entered treatment for the first time in 5 years. Within 6 months, he was clean and attending support meetings, Within a year, he was helping other addicts find recovery and had reconciled with his family. Today, he runs a ministry for parents of addicted children. Impossible. By human standards, absolutely, but not impossible for a saint who understood that love really can conquer death, that surrender really can lead to victory, that what looks like defeat can become triumph in God's hands. When you present your impossible request today, unite it with a sacrifice that proves you're serious. Fast from something you genuinely enjoy. Give up a comfort that makes life easier. Offer some small suffering in union with Christ's passion. Saint Maximilian taught that prayers accompanied by sacrifice arrive in heaven with greater urgency and power, like overnight delivery rather than regular mail. The third action strikes directly at the heart of evil and mirrors exactly what Saint Maximilian did in that concentration camp. Perform a concrete act of heroic charity. I'm not talking about dropping coins in a collection basket or writing a check to a good cause, though those things have their place in a well-ordered spiritual life. I'm talking about doing something that costs you personally, something that requires you to step out of your comfort zone, something that makes you vulnerable for the sake of another person's good. St. Maximilian didn't just feel sorry for Francis Gajowniczek when he heard that desperate cry. He didn't just pray for him silently while someone else handled the situation. He didn't just hope that somehow things would work out. He stepped forward with deliberate intention and said words that changed everything. Take me instead. That's heroic charity in its purest form. Love that acts decisively even when the cost seems too high to pay. Your heroic act doesn't have to be life-threatening to be life-changing for someone else. Visit that elderly neighbor who hasn't had a visitor in months and whose eyes light up when anyone remembers their name. Forgive that person who hurt you deeply and actually tell them you forgive them, not because they deserve it, but because forgiveness sets you both free. Give generously to someone who can never repay you and doesn't expect your kindness. Spend meaningful time with someone everyone else avoids because they're difficult or demanding or different. Feed someone who's genuinely hungry. Comfort someone who's drowning in grief. Listen to someone who desperately needs to be heard. Defend someone who's being unfairly attacked. Stand up for someone who can't stand up for themselves. Here's the spiritual principle St. Maximilian understood with crystal clarity. When we perform acts of sacrificial love on the feast days of the saints, we're not just helping individual people in isolated moments. We're participating in the cosmic battle between good and evil that rages in every human heart and every human community. Every act of genuine charity weakens the forces of darkness and strengthens the kingdom of light. Padre Pio often said that a single prayer united to a pure act of charity has more power to change the world than 1,000 prayers offered without love in action. Why? Because it mirrors the heart of God himself, who didn't just feel compassion for our fallen world, but acted decisively to save it at enormous personal cost. Let me share one more testimony to encourage your faith. Last year, on St. Maximilian's feast day, a businessman decided his heroic act would be to reconcile with his estranged brother after 15 years of bitter silence that had poisoned both their families. It wasn't easy. Pride had to be swallowed like bitter medicine. Harsh words had to be forgotten. Old wounds had to be forgiven. Justified anger had to be released. But he made the phone call that his heart had been avoiding for years, arranged the meeting that seemed impossible, and chose love over the familiar comfort of resentment. That reconciliation didn't just heal two brothers, it healed two entire family trees. Children who had never met their cousins suddenly discovered they had extended family who loved them. A mother who had grieved the division of her sons lived to see them embracing again at her 80th birthday party. And both men discovered that the anger they had carried for 15 years like a heavy backpack disappeared the moment they chose to let it go. When you combine these three actions, total consecration to Mary, an impossible request offered through the Mass, and a heroic act of charity. You're not just having a nice religious day that makes you feel temporarily better about yourself. You're entering into the very mystery that defined St. Maximilian's life and death. You're choosing to love without limits, to trust without reservations, to act without counting the cost. Now imagine this day unfolding like a symphony where every note builds toward a crescendo of grace. Picture yourself awakening with laser-focused purpose, knowing that today you will not be a passive observer of your own life, but an active participant in something sacred that has the power to change everything. You begin at dawn, kneeling before Mary's image, placing yourself completely under her protective mantle through renewed consecration. Your words aren't just sounds evaporating in the air, they're declarations that reshape your spiritual reality at the deepest level. As morning progresses, you find yourself at Mass or in a moment of spiritual communion, holding that impossible situation before the altar like a precious offering. You're not begging desperately like someone who doubts God's power. Instead, you're presenting your need with the quiet confidence of a child who knows their parent can move mountains with a whispered word. The Eucharist becomes not just a familiar ritual, but a moment of supernatural exchange. Your weakness for His strength, your limitations for His infinite possibilities, your fear for His perfect love. Then as the day continues its natural rhythm, you step into that act of heroic charity. Maybe it's uncomfortable. Maybe it requires swallowing pride or facing awkwardness. Maybe it costs you something you'd rather keep. But as you choose love over convenience, something fundamental shifts inside you. You discover that giving sacrificially doesn't diminish you, it expands you. You realize that the more love you pour out, the more room your heart develops for even greater love. This is how St. Maximilian lived every single day of his adult life. Each morning brought renewed consecration that set the tone for everything that followed. Each Mass deepened his trust in impossible graces. Each encounter with others became an opportunity for heroic love that left both giver and receiver transformed. He didn't reserve this way of living for special occasions or feast days when he felt particularly spiritual. But he understood that certain days, marked by heaven itself, carry amplified potential for transformation, like spiritual power lines that carry higher voltage. Padre Pio taught that when we align ourselves with the rhythms of grace that flow through the liturgical calendar, we're not just following ancient traditions or religious customs, we're positioning ourselves to receive what God wants to give us most abundantly. It's like a surfer who waits for the perfect wave rather than fighting against the ocean's natural patterns. Think about the spiritual mathematics of this day. You wake up as someone who may have been holding back from total surrender out of fear or doubt. You begin by letting go completely through Marian consecration. You continue by daring to ask for the impossible through Eucharistic prayer. You complete the circle by loving heroically in concrete action that proves your faith is real. By evening, you're not the same person who started the morning. The transformation isn't just emotional or psychological, it's supernatural, written into the very fabric of your soul. This change isn't temporary inspiration that fades when Monday morning arrives. When we cooperate fully with grace on days like this, we create what the mystics called permanent spiritual momentum, a trajectory that continues long after the feast day has passed, like a rocket that escapes gravity's pull. St. Maximilian understood this principle with mathematical precision. His consecration to Mary as a young man didn't just affect that single moment, it shaped every major decision for the rest of his life. His impossible trust in God's providence didn't just help during easy times. It sustained him through the unimaginable horrors of Auschwitz. His practice of heroic charity didn't just benefit occasional random recipients, it made him the kind of man who could step forward and die for a complete stranger without hesitation. The beauty of these three actions is that they form a complete spiritual ecosystem: consecration, opens your heart to receive grace, like a flower opening to sunlight. Impossible prayer stretches your faith to accommodate miracles you never thought possible. Heroic charity proves that the grace and faith are real by expressing them in sacrificial love that costs you something precious. Each action strengthens the others, creating a spiritual momentum that builds throughout the day and continues into your future. But here's what I want you to understand with absolute clarity. This isn't just about having one good day that you'll remember fondly. This is about discovering a pattern of living that can revolutionize your entire spiritual journey. When you experience the power of complete surrender, audacious prayer, and heroic love all in one coordinated day, you taste what your life could be like if you lived this way consistently. Many people make the tragic mistake of thinking that saints like Maximilian were somehow different from us, that they had spiritual advantages we lack or special hotlines to heaven that ordinary people can't access. The truth is exactly the opposite. They discovered secrets that are available to everyone, but most people never experiment with total commitment. They settled for partial surrender, reasonable prayers, and comfortable charity that doesn't require real sacrifice. Saints chose to go all the way, to burn their bridges, to risk everything on God's promises. Today gives you a chance to experience what all the way feels like. Not as a permanent commitment that frightens you into paralysis, but as a one-day experiment that might just change everything you thought you knew about God's willingness to work miracles in ordinary lives. As we reach the end of our time together, I want you to feel the weight of this moment pressing against your heart. You didn't stumble upon this message by accident while mindlessly scrolling through countless distractions. In a world filled with millions of videos competing for your attention, something drew you to hear about St. Maximilian Maria Kolbe on his feast day. That's not coincidence. That's providence with a purpose. Padre Pio often reminded his spiritual children that God never wastes our attention. When something sacred captures our focus, it's because heaven has orchestrated that encounter. Today, that purpose is crystal clear. You're being invited to step into a deeper level of spiritual living, to discover what your life could become when you stop holding back from God out of fear or false prudence. St. Maximilian's story teaches us that heroic love isn't reserved for extraordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. It's available to anyone willing to say yes to grace without counting the cost. Anyone brave enough to trust that God's power really can work through surrendered hearts. Anyone ready to prove their faith through sacrificial action that might look foolish to watching eyes. The three actions I've shared with you today aren't just historical curiosities about a saint from the past that we admire from a safe distance. They're your roadmap for spiritual breakthrough in the present moment. Total consecration to Mary, impossible prayer through the Mass, and heroic acts of charity, these aren't complicated theological concepts that require advanced degrees to understand. They're simple, concrete ways to position yourself for miracles, but here's what I need you to understand with every fiber of your being. Knowledge without action changes absolutely nothing. You can admire St. Maximilian's courage from the comfort of your chair, appreciate Padre Pio's wisdom like an interesting historical fact, and feel temporarily inspired by their examples. But unless you actually do something with what you've learned today, this will just be another nice religious story that fades from memory by next week. Don't let that happen. Don't be someone who collects spiritual insights like trophies, but never uses them to transform real life. Be someone who takes heaven seriously enough to risk looking foolish in the eyes of a world that has forgotten how to hope. I want to hear from you in the comments, and I want you to be bold about it. Tell me about your impossible prayer, that situation that seems hopeless by human standards, but might just be God's opportunity to show His power in your life. Share your heroic act of charity, That concrete way you're going to love someone sacrificially today, even if it costs you something you'd rather keep. Let's create a community of souls who refuse to settle for spiritual mediocrity, who dare to believe that the age of miracles hasn't ended just because the world has stopped expecting them. Your comment isn't just social media engagement or digital small talk. It's a public declaration of faith, a way of standing up and saying, I believe God can do the impossible in my life. When you share your intention, you're not just encouraging yourself, you're inspiring others to take their own leaps of faith into the unknown. And if this message has touched your heart, if these teachings have given you hope when you thought hope was exhausted, I need you to help us reach more souls who are drowning in despair. Hit that like button, not just because you enjoyed the content, but because you want other people struggling with impossible situations to discover these same truths that could save their lives. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about St. Maximilian's example of heroic love. You might be the instrument God uses to change someone's eternal destiny. Consider becoming a member of our channel family. We're not just creating content here for entertainment or religious feels. We're building a community of believers committed to living like the saints, to taking God at His word, to choosing love over fear in every situation that tests our resolve. Your membership helps us continue spreading these life-changing messages to souls who desperately need hope in a world that seems increasingly hopeless. Remember, we're in this spiritual battle together. The same forces of darkness that St. Maximilian faced in his time are still active in ours, perhaps more subtly, but no less destructively. They want us to believe that heroic sanctity is impossible for ordinary people, that miracles don't happen in our scientific age, that individuals can't make extraordinary differences in a world of billions. But saints like Maximilian prove otherwise with their very existence, and your life can prove otherwise too, if you're willing to risk everything on love. Today, August 14th, is not just another date on the calendar that you'll forget by tomorrow. It's your personal invitation to join the ranks of those who dare to love without limits, who trust without reservations, who act without counting the cost. The feast of St. Maximilian, Maria Kolbe, is your doorway into a life where the impossible becomes possible through faith that moves mountains. Don't waste this grace. Don't let this day pass like any other ordinary day in an ordinary life. Step forward, just as St. Maximilian stepped forward in that concentration camp when everyone else stepped back, and discover what God can do through a heart that holds nothing back from His love. Heaven is watching with anticipation. Mary is interceding with maternal tenderness. St. Maximilian is praying for you with the fervor of someone who knows what's possible when human love meets supernatural grace. The only question remaining is, what will you choose to do with this invitation to greatness? The saints aren't just examples to admire from a safe distance. They're friends to follow into the adventure of radical love. Today, follow St. Maximilian Maria Kolbe into that adventure, and watch as your impossible situations become God's greatest opportunities to reveal His glory through your ordinary life.